ridiculously pulling down one another. The consensus may have the remarks we made, like if it's only Africans who does make mistakes. Some even go as far as to say that black people will never ever see the way. But when a black man keep a black man off of the shelf, he automatically keeping down his own self. Like you telling yourself that yourself is good. Ask yourself if you're thinking the way you should. Read history of the bad days of slavery. With so much Africans was killed by Mussolini. Jack the Ripper and Hitler were not black men. But did they have one black man who was bad like them? So ridiculing yourself is just ignorance. Mr. Black Man, give yourself a chance. Give yourself a chance. Give yourself a chance. Because they will kick we already done. Hey! Love yourself first and take some examples. All the other races that live with the people, they are united. They treat the women sacred. Any disrespect, they will be aggravated. So unfortunately, hear what you must do. Try your best to treat your people the same way too. Help a brother or sister if they're falling down. And don't laugh when you see them flat on the ground. Like you're telling yourself that yourself is good. Ask yourself if you're thinking the way you should. BNM supporters can't treat me go. I wonder why they want Patrick Malin to go. But the other races is thinking this way. They wish for their stay until resurrection day. So ridiculing yourself is just ignorance. Mr. Black Man, give your own self a chance. Give yourself a chance. Give yourself a chance. Because they will keep me up the leader. Hey! Those of you who have some form of education, impart your knowledge to help your brother man. Don't assassinate his character, only to prove that you are superior. Not like the MP for Tobago East, who always describe his people like these. He always this man, he loved to attack, like he vexed with the father for making him black. Like you're telling yourself that you're self-loved. Ask yourself if you think it the way you should. Read history about Marcus Garvey, Macanda Daga, and Walter Rodney. And respect yourself in all that you do. Nobody in the world will do that for you. So ridiculing yourself is just ignorance. Mr. Black Man, give your own self a chance. Give yourself a chance. Give yourself a chance. Because we gon' end up laughing in that. Most people was enslaved to Wall Street. Many faced domination and treachery. It even happened here in the Caribbean. Caribs and Arawaks were enslaved to extinction. So we got to take example. If we want to progress as a people, read history so we would unite and fuse and stop using slavery as an excuse. Stop telling yourself that yourself is good. Ask yourself if you're thinking the way you should. Just say women breeding in garbage. And the old black brothers, swines and savages. But why is he walking around talking this rubbish? Knowing So ridiculing yourself is just ignorance. Mr. Blackman, give your own self a chance. Look, try and look fast. Don't try and look fast. Because fast, go put that kick in your ass.
Oh, good evening to you and welcome to Politics 101. Give your own self a chance. The explainer, the messenger of Calypso. Give your own self a chance. Black man, give your own self a chance. You know, wherever you're joining us from this afternoon, this evening, welcome to Politics 101. We know that there is CPL tonight, and lots of you would be tuning into that. So we are well aware of that. The show must go on, and we are going to make sure that we finish on time tonight so that you can give the CPL your undivided attention. We thought about calling off the program this evening, but the show must go on. The show must go on. Give your own self a chance. The explainer, there, one of the Calypsonians who is not always given the kind of credit that he deserves. The message. We have Chief Eric Phillips here tonight, and we're going to be talking about the African Holocaust and its consequences for the African condition, for reparations, economic development, and so forth. You know, ACDA has its annual African Holocaust event at the seaside, as we call it, the seaside. And Brother Eric is going to talk about that, the significance of that, and so forth. So please share the link. Please share the link and let everyone know that we are on tonight. We are on tonight. Give your own self a chance, because if you don't, they're going to kick me out of the dance. We have to make a distinction between self-criticism and belittling ourselves. And I think that's the message there of the Calypso, is that we have to make a distinction between self-criticism, constructive self-criticism, and really lambasting each other needlessly. And that's the message there from the messenger himself, the explainer. Wherever you're joining us from, whether you're joining us from in Guyana or you're joining us from outside of Guyana, welcome to Politics 101. As I said, I'm aware that there is CPL tonight, and lots of you would be taken up in that direction. We had a disaster, the embarrassing disaster last night, where the lights went out, and my goodness. Now, I don't know what is the story. I noticed the GPL and the stadium have put out a joint statement saying GPL is not the cause of the lights going out last night. You know, that is supposed to, I imagine, not make GPL look worse than it is. But if GPL was not responsible, and that the stadium has its own operation there, its own generator, and it operates its stuff itself there, then it makes it even worse. So it's not now GPL, it's GPL and others. Quite embarrassing. You know, I was making the point that, 58% of the budget goes towards building roads and buildings and so on. And that is supposed to, I assume, attract investors to come, because we have great roads and buildings and so on. But when they come and that happens, CPL is an investor. CPL came. Look at what happened there last night. in 2024. Trinidad lost the game because it came down to 5-0. If I were Trinidad, I would feel quite aggrieved. In fact, I would appeal. I mean, that's not natural. If rain intervened and the match had to be go down, that was not rain. It's electricity. My goodness. Oh my God. Oh my God. Welcome to Politics 101. Let me bring in Chief Eric. Eric, good night, my brother.
Good night, my brother. Good night, Chief Uhuru.
Thank you very much. You, if you were not watching the game last night, you'd have heard of it by now.
Well, I tried to follow it on internet because I'm out of Guyana,
Yeah,
and I saw what happened, and I thought it would come on within half an hour, and it didn't. And you're right, Trinidad should be really upset. It's unfair. There should be. It wasn't force majeure. They probably should legally challenge this because they were doing well, and to turn this into a 5-over match for an eliminator is quite outrageous. And to your point, if GPL is now saying it wasn't their fault, somebody is lying, because I live not too far from there, and when there's cricket, power in that area is focused on the stadium. So if there was the original system that the stadium had, GPL is always back up. Look, we have all sorts of events there, building expo, everything. Power is there, GPL is there. So it's a damn lie.
it's a damn lie. And Eric, I mean, the embarrassment. No, this is not about whether you are supportive of the PPP government or not. This is Guyana. This
Yeah,
is the world. I mean, the embarrassment that we have to go through. And like I said,
it's seen in India, it's seen in Australia, it's seen in South Africa, it's seen in Pakistan, it's seen all over the world where cricket is played. And that's what happened to us.
you, Eric, you're an engineer, so I mean, you are not like me, a layman when it comes to these things. What could have gone wrong there? I mean, we had the blackout at the airport just a
Yes.
couple of months ago, and now
I was there when that happened, and my trip to Panama got delayed by 12 hours.
Tell us what's happening here, man.
It's incompetence.
It blows the mind.
This is incompetence because this is a major international event. It's a small area. And even in other stadium, when this happens, within 20 minutes, it's fixed because there's always a backup system. There seems to have been none. And no one wants to take the blame, but it's outrageous.
And GPL said that they are not responsible. They're there to give backup, and that they're there throughout the tournament to give backup. So apparently their backup was not adequate because it took 2 hours before the thing can come back on.
Yeah, no, Trinidad should appeal because it's quite sad.
Yeah. If I were Trinidad, I would appeal. Trinidad is not my favorite team, but
I know.
This is not about your favorite team. This is about fairness
Fairness.
and justness, and we see the linkage here between incompetence, and fairness on the sporting field. Trinidad should not be penalized for the incompetence of those who are responsible for
because
power.
it wasn't rain. It wasn't rain.
It wasn't rain. Brother Eric, this is the month of October, and the month of October is a very important month for African people. Explain to us why.
Yes, Chief Uhuru. On the 12th of October, 1492, Columbus came to these parts of the world, and that started indigenous genocide and, of course, African enslavement. What is fascinating about this is that only in Guyana, the whole Caribbean, do we acknowledge the 12th of October as African Holocaust Day. ACT has been doing that for almost 20 years. And it's important because it acknowledges what has happened to us. Most people don't realize, and let me give some deeper history, that it was the Catholic Church in 1452 where it was Pope Nicholas who issued a papal bull which is an ecclesiastical law stating that if you are not Catholic or Christian, you should be seized, you could be enslaved, and all of your properties taken away. There were two other papal bulls by the Catholic Church, Inter Caetera, and with that, Romanus Pontifex, it was called the Age of Discovery. It essentially gave Europeans the right to enslave everyone they came into contact with who is not Christian. And that's why, to some extent, Brazil is Portuguese and the rest of Latin America is Spanish, because the Pope also cut the world in two. Most people don't realize this. But the
Mm-hmm.
significance is that this was the beginning of our African Holocaust. And in Guyana, over 200 years of enslavement resulted in 473,000 Africans dying to build Guyana. Everything that Guyana is was created by Africans. As a matter of fact, in 1834, when we had emancipation, in 1834, it wasn't true emancipation, that was in 1838. 100% of the GDP of Guyana was being built by Africans. Today, we have less than 2% of GDP. And again, in 1834, we had an autocratic system, winner take all. Today, we have the same thing in a winner take all system, which is autocratic. And indeed, Jimmy Carter, who became 100 years yesterday, came to Guyana and said that this is the worst system he has seen in a biethnic society. And he also made the statement that the PPP would never have shared governance because they will never allow governance to be shared in Ghana, because they have a view that because of their majority, ethnic majority, and the fact that the private sector would always back them and the indigenous people can always be bribed, that they will remain in power in perpetuity. How did that come about? Indentureship brought 239,000 Indians to Guyana, of which 75,000 went back. If you do the math, then 164,000 Indians remained in Guyana and got land because that was part of their payment. Now, in 1838, there were only 80,000 Africans. So there was a 2-to-1 imbalance in numbers between the number of Indians brought here during indentureship and the number of freed Africans. And that difference exists today, where there are more ethnic Indians than Africans. So the history from the Holocaust, why it happened, when it happened, Columbus coming here on 12th of October, 1492, and its consequences, we're living it today. We still are living with an inherited winner-take-all system, which is colonialism again in a different form. We're still living in an ethnic divided society because you had whites and enslaved and Amerindians, etc., etc.
So the coming of Columbus, you are arguing, is
Mhm.
where we must begin the
Yes.
narrative of here, because
And that's 532 years ago.
that's exactly. Why call it the Holocaust? When we talk about Holocaust, we usually associate that with the Jewish experience during the period of the
But this
Nazi.
is a magamazi if you use our word. But it's
Okay.
worse than the Jewish Holocaust,
Hmm.
because the Jewish Holocaust, you're talking about 6 million people. But if you were to look at Africa in 1650, Africa and Europe had 100 million people each. By 1850, Europe grew to 265 million people, an increase of 165 million. During that same period, Africa shrunk from 100 million to 95. So we're missing 170 million Africans in this world. So that's a Holocaust, because when you attacked a village, you left the old and the wounded to die. And ultimately, what we have lost in the African continent, unlike the European propaganda that only 12 million or 16 million people were brought here, 170 million people perished during the African Holocaust on the continent and in the Caribbean and in Latin America and in the USA.
Brother Eric Phillips here tonight talking about the African Holocaust, AGDA, as that event on the seaside, at the seaside.
Yes,
At
on
the
Saturday
seaside.
at the bandstand. Normally, David, it's about a 2 to 3 hour event. In the beginning, we have Brother Irvin, who is the fetus, who manages the entire event. So their blessings, their prayers, or libation. We have some speeches. We have a dance in honor of our ancestors, and then we go to the sea when the tide is going out. So it's time for us to put flowers and wreaths or any other things we want to do in the water to honor our ancestors. So this year it's at 12 o'clock on Saturday because that's when the tide goes out. So the event will start about 2 hours earlier, and we honor our ancestors and the 473,000 who died to build Guyana. Sadly enough, only Africans come to that event, and yet those are the people who died to make Guyana what it is today. And interestingly enough, a lot of their bones are ossified in the oil that we're getting.
And the oil that we're getting, a very important point to be made there, the sacrifices. Eric, repeat the number of Africans who died just in Guyana. Just in
473,000 Africans died to build Guyana. And
200.
that has nothing to do with those who died coming here.
They're not included in that
They're
number.
not included. And that was 20%.
When you look at a place like Haiti, for example, I mean, where the numbers were much more than in Guyana. What's the total number of Africans who, first of all, were all the way from Africa against their will, and second, who over the period of enslavement perished?
David, historians, especially Western historians, have been lying to us. Indeed, as I mentioned, in 1650, both Europe and Africa had 100 million. By 1850, Europe grew to 165, Africa shrunk to 95. That is the real number. 170 million Africans were involved in this sacrifice. Now, in the Haitian Revolution alone, almost 500,000 Africans died to beat the British, French, and the Americans. So the Holocaust is significant. And in Haiti, the largest number of people died there. And yet they were the banner for freedom, because the Haitian Revolution, which by the way started in August. And David, I want to make another point. We're just coming out of Amerindian Heritage Month. I do not understand why August is not African Heritage Month. On 1st of August, we had emancipation. On 3rd of August, that's when Damon did his uprising. On the 17th of August, we had Marcus Garvey's birthday. On the 18th of August, we had the 1822 Demerara Slave Rebellion. The Haitian Revolution started in August 1791, and the Emancipation Act was passed on the 28th of August 1833. And we have several critical birthdays of people who have been revolutionaries born in August. So August should be African Heritage Month. People should realize that the Amerindians who have an Heritage Month in Guyana, they were in partnership with the British and Dutch to help to enslave us. That is historical fact. But they have an entire month. And that's part of the dialogue why Africans don't get the respect for building Guyana, or they don't get economic equity. The indigenous people who were partners with the British and Dutch in enslaving us have an Amerindian Act of 2006, which is a reparatory justice act, which up to today gives them about 19% of Guyana. They have an Amerindian Development Fund. They have an Amerindian Ministry. They have a Tushaus Council, and they have billions of dollars in their budgets. And they're arguing that they are stewards of the earth, stewards of the forest. Well, when we were here in 1621, there were only about 6,000 Amerindians in Guyana. I don't know how 6,000 to 10,000 Amerindians could manage 83,000 square miles. Amerindians at that time would burn a place, live it, hunt, and move on. There were no stewards of the forests. And this is part of the lies that we're told. For example, most people don't know that people of African descent in Latin America and Caribbean, they control or they're the managers of 64% of the Amazon forest. But we only hear about Amerindians doing it or indigenous people. I will repeat, 64% of the Amazon is managed by people of African descent. And there's a claim by people of African descent in Latin America of 205 million hectares of land. They've only got 9. And that's part of the reparatory justice issue facing Brazil and Colombia and places like that. So there's a lot of misinformation. And I'm hoping that on African Holocaust Day or on African Heritage Month, which is August, that our young people start doing their history. We're the only people in the Caribbean who don't pursue history. You go to Jamaica, history is known. You go to Trinidad, history is known. Barbados, history is known. We do not teach history in our schools again. We don't have people in university doing history. So the impact of people of African descent in Ghana is lost purposefully because of that lack of teaching history. And by not teaching history, we are now pushing social cohesion. Okay, guys, we're 6 races. Let's live together. Let's be nice to each other. Instead of practicing economic inclusion. I don't want social cohesion, which is one Guyana. I want social cohesion, one Guyana, plus economic inclusion, which makes it all Guyana.
Which makes it all Guyana. I remember Andrew, uh, uh, who was aide to Dr. King, who's still alive there in Atlanta.
Yes, I'm seeing his face. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember him saying, I was a young man, and he said, now that we have integrated the lunch counters, let's integrate the money.
Yeah, Ravi Dev talks about integrating the police force and the public service, but he doesn't want to talk about integrating the economy.
Yes, and that's the basis of this. So, Brother Eric, so we have the African Holocaust. We're dating it back to Columbus's misadventure.
Mm-hmm. By the way, he was guided here by Moors, who are black people. So remember that the Moorish dynasty ended in 1492. After 700 years of ruling Europe and Spain.
And of course, what followed is the enslavement of African people, because the Catholic Church said that it violated the Christian spirit to enslave white people.
Yes.
People, and then that Indian people, native Indians, they had souls, and so they could not be enslaved.
And because of the Asiento, they killed a lot of indigenous people.
They did.
There's a book called 1492. When you read it, you'll see that there were about 3 million indigenous people, and only 100,000 were left after that Holocaust.
So make the link, Eric, between the African Holocaust and reparations. You started to, because you talk about
now,
the work.
International law states that if slavery was a crime against humanity, and therefore there should be reparations, there should be repair. And that's why the Guyana Reparations Committee, the CARICOM Reparations Commission, Prime Ministerial Subcommittee on Reparations, we're all pursuing this legal right. It's not just a moral issue. And that's because as a crime against humanity, so many people were killed. But beyond that, our culture was taken away from us. It's the only time in history where a people lost their culture. Indentureship came with their names, their food, their culture, their religion, everything. And they had special rights, and they came here as free people. Africans did not. So slavery demands reparations. I mean, in Durban, 2001, that's what was declared by the United Nations. And now, so in Guyana, we are pursuing reparations on 2 fronts. One, as CARICOM, a member of the CARICOM Commission, and two, as people of African descent in Guyana. Now, in terms of CARICOM, Guyana is pursuing reparations from the British and the Dutch. The Dutch started here in Guyana, and by the way, the Dutch started in our Guyana before they started in Suriname. And so a lot of the tribes that were brought to Guyana, British Guyana or Dutch Guyana at the time, were then taken to Suriname. And so a lot of the tribes in Suriname are related to are related to Guyanese. We don't know that. As a matter of fact, we have the Quinties, which is a group of 300 people from African descent in Guyana who left Guyana in 1763 and went to Suriname. And I tried to bring the Quinties here last Emancipation Day to come to Guyana, but Minister Ramson blocked it. After we had told them about 4 months in advance, 2 weeks before they were about to arrive in Guyana, they had practiced, they were come to tell us about their history. He blocked it in our budget. But coming back to the point, the British, according to the Brattle Report, owe people of African descent in Guyana $3 trillion. The Dutch owe people of African descent in Guyana $50 billion, right? So that is Guyana pursuing reparations from the Dutch and the British. But Guyana, people of African descent in Guyana also have a legitimate claim in Guyana itself, because the sovereign state of Guyana, we became independent in 1966, right, gave indigenous people reparatory justice through the Amerindian Act of 2006. And as I mentioned, they now own about 19% of Guyana. They have Amerindian Development Fund, they have the Shows Council, they have a ministry. They just got carbon credits, 15% of 750 million US. And if you look at the budget, you'll see how the government is giving them a lot of things so that they could vote for them next year. So people of African descent, because 473,000 of us died, because we built the economic base of Guyana, because we're the ones that made Guyana livable, we indigenized Guyana, we are also owed by the sovereign state of Guyana reparation. The Venn Commission states that we cleared 15,000 square miles, which is 18% of Guyana. So the state of Guyana, the sovereign state of Guyana, owes people of African descent land to the extent of 18% of Guyana. And because of slavery, people of African descent are at the bottom of the ladder. Indentured people got land and they got paid. They kept their culture. And that's Portuguese, Chinese, and Indians. Indigenous people got paid through the Amerindian Act of 2006. So we're the only ones who haven't been paid. And to show you how spiteful people are, Ravi Dev and his crew, when we were pursuing reparations through CARICOM, did not saw CARICOM as only doing Black people's business. And therefore, in essence, they did not want people of African descent in the Caribbean to get reparations. When they saw the progress that the CARICOM Reparations Commission made, they then jumped on the bandwagon and said indentureship must be given reparations. And now, as you see in Ravi Dev's recent speech, he's saying that Africans don't deserve anything because they're lesser people, getting back to the whole racist statement made by the British and the Dutch and endorsed by the Catholic Church through the Dum de Versus, which was the first papal act. So everything is intertwined. And so people of African descent deserve reparations both from the British and the Dutch, as well as the government of Guyana. And until they have that, they will never have economic equity in Guyana. What is economic equity? They share in the bountifulness of Guyana because they're the ones that died. How many people you think died during World War, David? They were Africans. How many people you think died during World War II for Guyana? They were Africans. Other races hardly participated in World War I and II. So we've been doing all the dying. In 1823, in 1763, when Damon was hung at the new Parliament building, Africans have always been dying for Guyana and getting nothing. And those young people in Guyana, who people of African descent, because they don't know their history, it's easy to make them believe that they're descendants of slaves, not descendants of people with great civilization, the pyramids, you name it. They make them believe that slavery is the only thing that people of African descent or Africans know, when we are really the essence of civilization. We're the humanity of civilization. We're cradle of civilization. And until that is taught, our young people will be misdirected and get confused between being PPP and PNC versus being Africans and people of African descent.
Brother Eric Phillips here tonight. We're talking about the African Holocaust, which will be observed this month on the 12th of October by AGDA. They've been doing it for over 200 years, dating the African Holocaust back to the landing of Columbus on the island of Hispaniola. He got lost, of course, and he
Yeah.
landed there. um, and we're saying that the Holocaust actually begins there.
David, I want to add a fact because people get confused about who Columbus is. I'd like them to Google Columbus's book. Columbus wrote a book where he said his trip was destined by God.
There you go.
He was doing God's work. That's what Columbus said. And it's the same thing the Catholic Church was saying. If you're not Catholic, then you're inhuman. And they are God's emissary on earth. So I think the Catholic Church should apologize for slavery. They're the ones that created it, initiated it. It was ecclesiastical war. They declared war, and that enabled Europe to go to Africa and kill Africans and enslave Africans and to put Africans against each other. The Catholic Church. Most Africans who are Catholic do not know their history. Most Africans who are Muslims do not know their history because the Muslims enslaved Africans for 11 centuries. 11 centuries.
That fact is not known at all. I of course, have to teach that kind of stuff, and the students have a fair sense of the transatlantic slave trade, but that Eastern slave trade, where
the Arab slave trade or the Muslim
Arab,
slave trade,
yes,
35 million people were involved in that.
exactly.
And the reason why you don't see a lot of people of descendants of Africans in that part of the world is that the men were, what do you call it? They were killed.
They were killed.
They were circumcised,
Yes.
so that they could not impregnate the women in the harem. And
Yes,
7 of 10 African men died during the Arab slave trade because of that.
Yes.
And when, unlike in the English slave trade or the Christian slave trade, where they breeded us to get more slaves or more enslaved, if you impregnated somebody in the harem, that child was killed.
Yes, and of course the men were also sent to fight and all that kind of stuff, and so
eunuchs. Yeah.
Yes. Our history is so very much important. Eric Thomas Jefferson, who is the author of the American Declaration of Independence, in a little known book called Notes on the State of Virginia, he argued in that book that Native Indians were red people in white skins, and so that they could be civilized. But he said Africans, he speculated that they were feeble in body and mind, and they could not be civilized. But he wasn't sure, but he would leave it to science to prove it. So here was Jefferson, who was known as the brightest of the founding fathers. He wrote the Declaration of Independence. Here he was speculating in an affirmative way of the African, the African inferiority, and then he says to science, "Prove me right."
Yes,
which of course the science of the 19th century, the eugenics, proved
David,
him right.
I wrote a book called on racism. And I went through the history of what happened. And of course, we heard about the curse of Ham.
Yes.
And people don't realize that it was a Jewish scholar, Maimonides,
Mm-hmm.
who promoted that idea. And most people don't realize that Jews were significantly involved in the slave trade, but that's another issue. But then all of their philosophers, all of their scientists started out to try to prove that the African was inferior. And they came up with all these different theories. But then they were trapped when they realized that there were great African civilizations that did greater things than them. Today, the pyramid cannot even be rebuilt. Today, the pyramid, if you look at the geometry and the universality of the pyramid in terms of its linkages to the moon and the sun, how do they believe that? The temple of the pyramid of Cheops is in the center of the Earth's landmass. I was seeing that Neil deGrasse was saying that the three pyramids of Cheops are in line with the Orient Belt. So the things that we have done scientifically, Imhotep, the father of medicine, did 82 different surgeries. When you looked at the great things that have done by people of African descent, how can they then justify that we were not with soul? And yet they call us savages, but they have all of our great things in their museums, like the things from Benin and King Tut and all these things. So if we were so uncivilized and so lesser than them, why are they storing all of our great achievements in their museum and are refusing to give us back? Now they're trying to say that the pyramids were built by people from space.
The Benin civilization really was something else, and lots of work being done in that area.
And
What
even
is
and it wasn't just Egypt, the great Zimbabwe. I mean, when you
Zimbabwe?
look
Yeah,
throughout Africa, there are so many things that were done.
yeah, and some of the evidence is still there.
Yes,
The Nubia, if you go to what is now
yes,
Sudan, all the
yes.
remnants of the Nubian.
Sudan has more pyramids than Egypt.
That's There you go. There you go. That is not very much known. And of course, Eric, we live in Guyana, and it's so difficult to have a certain kind of conversation. This conversation will be looked at by people who are not African as racial. Guyana is one of the few places that where half of the population defines racism as as the other half talking about themselves. So we are
Yeah,
Africans, we talk about Africans, we are racist. And I have been thinking about that thing. We let it slide, but generations upon generations of people are civilized to believe an African who says that, I'm proud, I have a history, that he or she is racist. That is why those two people could go into that schoolyard, and a man who has so many identities. He's a man. He's medium built. He's looks older than 50. He speaks English, but the thing that they held on to because they were offended by him telling them where not to park, they reach
yes,
for his blackness.
yes.
And so over a time, we are socializing a population, but in particular, half of the population, that blackness is a bad thing.
Well, David, you have to read Clemcy Turan, who has been very honest about it. And it's taught through religion, it's taught at homes because people aren't born racist. In Ghana, it is taught that people of African descent or Africans are the bottom of the ladder, the bottom of the caste system, regardless of though I meet Indians who are 10 times darker than me. So it's about a religious belief that's become a sociological belief that's now been entrenched in our politics to divide us so that power can be accumulated by one per type of person. But if you were to be honest about it and you were to know history, you will know that this has been taught. Look at what's going on with Modi in India and the Muslims. Look at what's going on right now in Israel and Palestine. It's people being taught that they are superior to another group. And as Bob Marley says, until the philosophy, that song is a powerful song. But again, it's taught, and it's taught for political reasons, it's taught for cultural reasons. And this is where we are. So I don't say anything bad about Indians, but I'm racist. I've taught almost 6,000 Indian students at UG. Go ask any of them if I'm racist. But the Kisuns and the Ravi Devs want to perpetuate this because we're speaking on behalf of ourselves.
That's
Which
right.
comes back to the important point, which the Calypsonian said, the messenger himself. If you don't advocate for yourself, no one else will. Indians in Ghana will not advocate for us, the Chinese, the Portuguese, the Amerindians. We have to advocate for ourselves. And if we don't advocate for what we want, I don't blame the political party in power not to do anything because it's not in their interest. So we have to say to them, this is our history, these are our rights, we demand these rights, and here is the exclusion. We could show the exclusion. Ram Karan is now starting to become honest because he knows external to Guyana, people in the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, the Caribbean, and Africa know about the exclusion of people of African descent in Guyana. Even in the Caribbean, with the exception of Africans from Trinidad, people throughout the Caribbean know that when they come here for business in Guyana, they don't get business if they're Black. They're told also not to associate themselves with Black groups in Guyana. If not, you'll not get anything, regardless of the fact that they're not going to get anything anyhow. So Ram Karan came out and started now talking about affirmative action and justifying it, that in years past, we didn't have any money, we were in debt. But he knows that Africans have been excluded, and he knows it's immoral. And he knows it's a political decision to exclude Africans, because there are many different ways in which Africans and Amerindians could be included.
Very way to exclude Indians. And I was reminded last evening that the Vice President, Jack Day himself, was brought before the courts a few years ago for racist
Like Kisuan of all people.
Yeah. And he passed through Wim Magistrates Court. I remember going there to give solidarity to that case. And this gentleman in the picture saw on social media that I was there and, excuse me, traveled from number 51 and came to Wim to meet me. And we took that picture. Flash Gordon, I know you're in the audience tonight. Flash Gordon, here is some history. I can't remember what year it was. I mean, but it was about 10 years ago.
Yeah, so you look much younger there.
So here you are, Flash Gordon, as part of history. This is a mark of when the Vice President, Jack Dio, was pulled before the court for racist language, and I was there that morning to see him in handcuffs and so forth. Not always a pleasant sight, because I do not believe in the politics of revenge and so forth. But here is a man who utters racial and racist things over a period of time and makes no apology from it. And then he turns around and calls people like Eric Phillips and myself racist. Eric, and you know that we go out of our way not to express ourselves about the Indian condition, you know. Not that we don't know Indian history or we don't have views.
Or we don't have family who are Indian or Amerindian.
That's right.
My grandfather is Amerindian.
Right.
My mother's name is Zarita because she grew up in a village with Indians, and they lived together in Wickenham.
There you go. There you go. So there's a sensitivity on our part to the honor of another group. But these guys from the other side say all kinds of horrible things about Black people.
Yeah, we're inferior.
Yes, about
we're dogs,
and
we are monkeys. And
Yeah,
recently, of course, Ravi expounding the principle that we are inferior to Indians, therefore we should not get anything.
that's
That
right.
was his
That's right.
thesis.
That's it. Yes, yes, yes. Because if, according to him, Burnham took away things from Indians and gave it to black people, and at the end of the reign of the PNC, Indians were ahead of black people, it means that something is wrong with black people, right? We cannot exist in a state of freedom. We don't know what to do with opportunities.
You know, David, what is so sad is that Ravi knows history. He knows of the exclusion. There are three things you need to be economically, move forward economically. You need access to capital, you need access to state lands, and you need education. We've been excluded from access of state assets, whether it's oil blocks, gold blocks, this concession, land. You can go on and on. Procurement. We've been excluded from state assets. If you look at all of the wealthy people in Guyana, they became wealthy through state assets. Robert Passard got licenses for radio and TV. If you look at radio licenses, I mean, you can go through every state asset. We were excluded, right? Capital, we are excluded from capital. We don't own any of the banks. There are six banks. And a lot of times when our young people take business plans to the banks, they're rejected. And 6 months later, somebody else is implementing that business plan.
The very business plan,
Right.
the very business plan, the very business plan. A young
And the
man.
third thing is education. And
Yeah,
right now, we have apartheid in education. And this is not talking about apartheid in the broader sense. What I'm saying is we have an imbalanced educational system where at age 12, 12 out of 14,000 people in Guyana, young people, are lost in the system. And now we have to bring people in because we don't have an educated workforce, because our political system nurtures and rewards a system where we exclude our young people of all races at age 12.
we exclude our young people at age 12. And, when you think about the children who were brought across the Atlantic, because they were children,
Yes,
some of them were 11 and 12 and 13, young girls, young boys. And by the time they're 18, 19, they're dead. They
yes.
work.
Three and a
And
half years was the average lifespan.
the average lifespan, and we are trying to enlighten the country, not just black people, enlighten the country about that history and what that means in terms of understanding our condition. And then you're called racist. You take a place like Haiti. Haiti, we grew, all of us here, Haiti is the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. Well, Haiti was the most, and the term they use, as you know, Eric, was the most prosperous sugar colony.
It was
How do you move from the most prosperous sugar colony to the poorest country in the hemisphere? That is what.
because they demanded reparations from
There,
you,
there you go.
and that reparations killed Haiti, 150 million francs, which stifled growth. And then the US came in, took away their gold. I mean, the history of Haiti is just about the West purposefully
Yes,
demonizing and stealing Haiti's wealth.
yes,
And now they
yes.
want to, because it was a strategy that since you were the first one to defeat us, we'll make sure you never survive as an example. And we're seeing that in the Middle East now. It's like revenge.
It's like revenge. Um, Good evening to all of you, those of you who took the time to join us tonight here on Politics 101. We've been talking about the African Holocaust. Again, Eric, what date, time?
Yes, it's Saturday, the 12th of October at noon at the bandstand. And you are going to participate in an incredible spiritual ceremony. Then we walk around the bandstand 3 times. We go to the ocean and we throw wreaths. And if you don't have any flowers, you can get flowers there. Agda provides them. But it's
Actor.
time that you start reconnecting with your identity. I mean, I keep telling people, and it's so funny, when you leave Guyana and you go to any part of the world, they don't know you're Guyanese, but they know if you're African or Indian, and that's how they treat you. Guyana is a geography. It's not an identity in the sense of your real identity. You're Indian or African or Chinese. That's your identity. And if you can't honor your ancestors, then you're disconnected from your identity. And that's why people are schizophrenic. And it's interesting how Ravi puts it. And I think you would counter them. You could be Guyanese, you could be African, you could be Christian, you could be all of those at the same time. There's no cognitive dissonance in saying I'm a person of African descent or African Guyanese. I mean, in the United States, everybody acknowledges who they are, Italian American, and there's no issue. But in Guyana, they want us all to be Guyanese. We are all Guyanese by birth.
That's right. That's right. That's right. But they want us to be all Guyanese so that we cannot be African. And
Right.
therefore, if we're not African, we cannot demand what is owed to us
Right.
as
And
African.
we're lost in our identity.
We-
So a lot of Africans in Guyana are confused because they say they're
Yeah,
Christian first.
yeah.
You
Yeah.
weren't born a Christian. You were born African.
Yes. You're born
Yeah.
out.
You're born African. You weren't born Christian.
Yeah.
And you could convert from Christianity to be a Muslim or whoever you want. But you can't convert yourself from being an African to be an Indian. You're
That's
African or you're Indian or you're Amerindian.
That's right. Guyana came into being in 1966. What our people were calling themselves before that?
Precisely.
They were calling themselves Negro. They were calling themselves African. They were calling themselves
Creole.
Black. They were calling themselves Creole. And people are telling you now that some or the other that you must be Guyanese and not be African. The Indian or the Amerindian doesn't have to say I am Amerindian because
Precisely.
they don't have to say I am East Indian. Those things were never taken away from them. That identity was never challenged, so they don't have that challenge. We have the challenge of having to reaffirm every time our identity. And that is why you always hear the first African, the first black man to this, the first black. You don't hear about the first East Indian or the first a white man or anything like that, right? Because their history was not interrupted. When we
It's like I
refer to
said last
Obama's
week,
the
a couple of
first,
weeks ago,
that's
David.
right. Yes.
If an Indian wants to build a business network, he can go to India.
Yeah.
If a Chinese person wants to build a business network or to get a concession or to represent a Chinese company, they could go to China. Where do Africans go? Africa is not one country. It is 55 countries. And we don't know where we came from. But an Indian knows I came from India. My ancestors, a Chinese person knows I came from China. And that is part of the disconnection that people of African descent in Guyana have, where they're being told that they're Christian first or they're something else first, but never African first. And then when they leave Guyana and they come to the States, they then become African American or West Indian American. So this disconnect is frightening because it creates schizophrenia in our young people who can't have the self-esteem of knowing that they came from a great continent. It's indeed a great continent. It still has most of the wealth of the world in Africa. I mean, Botswana owns 40% of the world's diamonds. I mean, you can go on and on. The chrome, the iron, the mercury, the lithium, the uranium, the rare earths. It's still Africa.
Still African. And when you go back to what they call the antiquity, you find they were dealing with technology, the iron, the Nubian.
Precisely.
Were using
the Benin
iron.
bronzes.
Yeah,
the pyramids.
The Benin
the mathematics, the science. David, we were the first doctors, lawyers, teachers, agriculturalists, hunters, scientists. We were the first. Because it's only 60,000 years ago, other people came on this earth. And if you look at Lucy's skeleton, we've been here for 3.5 million.
Yes, that's right.
And Africans, everybody else is linked to Africa. There's no Indian without having an African ancestry. There's no Chinese without having an African ancestry, because we were the first people.
We continue to do our work. We continue to do our work of educating African people, educating Guyana, educating ourselves about our history, because it's so important when you have ethnic groups living side by side, that we become acquainted with the history of each group.
It's
We
the
as
only way you get self-respect,
yeah,
self-esteem, and mutual respect. Trying to force it with a theme that is problematic at best. You can't tell people who they are. They know who they are. You can't brainwash people to tell them who they are. That's Hitler.
there you go. Brother Eric Phillips, thank you very much for coming through
I hope we win
another week,
tonight.
and I will see you in a week's time.
Great. I know
Right.
St. Lucia was supposed to bat. I'm going to go look at it. Hope there is no outage again.
Well, there's no outage. St. Lucia's 143 for one after,
Kidding.
yes, they got a blazing start. And so they're 143 for one after 14 overs.
Well,
So,
that's 200 there coming up. Yeah.
yeah. So they're going at 10 per over.
Mhm.
We shall see. We shall see. Thanks
Take
again,
care, my
Eric.
brother.
All right. And to you, the audience, thank you all very much for staying with us another evening. I'll see you all tomorrow evening. You're now released. Those of you who are cricket fanatics, you're now released to give your undivided attention to the cricket. As I said, it's they're going at 10 per over. The St. Lucia Kings. Here's hoping that Guyana would not have to chase a taller order than 10 over. And here's hoping that the lights don't go off again tonight. If you hear